the Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast featuring the Crop Doctors.
Good afternoon from the Crop Doctors Podcast studio in Stoneville. Drew is visiting with us this afternoon. Drew, good to see you. Hadn't seen you in a while.
Good. It's been a while.
Drew's running the direction. Tom and I are running our own direction, so we finally got together with Drew.
And rarely do we pass one another on the road, even in a town as small as Stoneville.
I see Drew's truck early in the morning at the office, and that's about the only time that I see it. We're catching Drew early this week, and so that we're going to be a whole week out from dropping this, so y'all humor us a little bit if the weather happens to change over the next 7 or 8 days, but Tom's got commitments, I got commitments, Drew's got commitments, and this was one of the few times that we thought we were going to actually have to get together and sit down and talk about irrigation. Drew, I asked this question to Paralisi last year, so the bar is pretty high because his response,
oh gosh,
I have to say, it didn't see it coming.
Prepared to be disappointed.
Jaw dropper, it was a good one.
It was exceptional.
I think I know what direction you're going.
All right, College World Series. What is Drew Golson's walkout song?
Oh man, I'm the worst at music in general. I listen to talk radio and I hear it from my daughter every time I get in the truck. I just don't listen to much music. Gosh, putting me on the spot on that. Something to get you pumped up. Walkout song. Back in Black, I guess. Something. Roll it. You got to get in the mindset.
Solid choice.
Doesn't hit the level of Paralisi.
Brian.
No, I can imagine. Yeah.
Parade of Bulls by Rage Against the Machine.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think most Rage Against the Machine songs are
Well, that'll get
aggressive.
you. They're great workout songs.
Yeah.
Whenever they work
I
them
think
into
aggressive.
things I'm
Violent's
working
not
out,
the right
it's
word.
just
Aggressive.
Well, I was
ruthless.
kind of focused on internally what, getting me excited to go up to the plate, but that's more directed on intimidating those out there in the field.
Well,
too.
when he comes out with shaved bald head and that goatee, I'd be cautious.
Yeah.
And that's funny you say you listen to talk radio. Steve Martin told me once, he said, I ride around the state and rarely do I ever turn a radio on.
Oh, I can sit.
I looked at him and I said, the radio on my truck never gets turned off. It never gets turned off.
Just on a long road trip with my family, and the fact that I can sit in complete silence baffles all of them, and they do not understand. But yeah, I don't listen to the radio or song or music very much.
Always music on in my truck.
I feel like I did disappoint.
No, that's
No.
solid. That's a solid choice.
That's a very good choice.
We play songs constantly on request because nobody knows what it's like to just play the radio.
Yeah, I hear that from my kids too. Like, why, Mom? I tell her what song to play.
Yeah.
Play it. It's like the TV now. We don't have to wait and just listen to what shows up. Like, I just put it on. If I do, it's FM.
We play them on YouTube. I feel like YouTube, you got
Pick.
Yeah, there's more. I don't know. If I do Amazon Music, sometimes I can't find it.
Right.
It seems like I have an easier time finding.
Well, they
on-
shut that down
on
about a
YouTube.
year ago. You used to be able to just get
Well, see,
almost anything on
yeah.
Amazon.
But we can't even deal with the 7 seconds of ad
Yeah.
before the song starts.
Yeah.
Let alone
I know.
the 10 minutes of news and market report.
It's concerning
The swap
when they
shop.
throw their hands up. Like,
Drew, we talked to Eric a few weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago. Was that a couple weeks ago? I've lost track of time.
That sounds right.
I think it was a couple weeks ago. He mentioned watering corn, getting started watering corn. We'll start with corn, and we'll just kind of go crop by crop because there's a lot of pipe out.
Yep.
You said you had seen some water. Certainly, you got water running on rice. That's the main one I've seen.
Right.
I personally haven't seen
I have
a run
seen
open
some
anywhere.
water running on corn last week prior to the rain, and I got several calls last week. Either somebody is watering, which then we mentioned being a little contagious, then that prompted questions about other people. And the other flip of that, I got some phone calls about my moisture sensors are dry or wet, really low. We've got some rain, but and they're a little bit further along, and it's right around tasseling. But I always water right around tasseling, but the profile's still wet. Should I hold off? And so, like, there's the flip side of those. But I had several calls starting about last week, which I've always said the two most frequent times I get conversations about asking about when to irrigate is the first irrigation and the last irrigation. And so I think we're right in that window of that first irrigation in corn. Y'all talked about that with Larson. We try to hold off till like right before tasseling. That's when the peak water use really ramps up. And so we want to make sure we have a profile that's full and ready for that corn to use that water when it ramps up. And so trying to have that timing just right on not wasting water, irrigating too early, not hurting yourself, but also having adequate moisture whenever you get into that, getting close into the week out into tasseling. And then that's when your water use really picks up. Then you can stay on this pretty regular schedule. And then as it starts to mature and get into milk, then it's going to use. And I think Larson's talked about that quite a bit by not scheduling or not irrigating based off of just a time of the week or a day that we're just on a normal schedule, as that curve of that water use of corn and really all crops are going to be, it's going to peak. And so matching your irrigation based on the crop water use is what we try to do. And so on the early end of that curve, as it's ramping up, not irrigating too early is important. I mean, it helps root establishment. It helps not getting it too wet too early. There's really everything that we've seen, and others really everywhere across, is looking at where that risk or where that vulnerability is on yield, on being too dry early. It's pretty low, and so you're not hurting yourself. And so best case is you're overwatering and wasting money, and worst case we see a lot of yield hits due to being too wet and not waiting to the right time to irrigate. And so holding off, trusting there's moisture down there, those roots are going, looking for water. That's a good thing, so that when we get in peak heat time and peak water use in the middle of July, you've got a lot established, a lot of root depth that is established. You're not feeding it too early, but then that's when we want to make sure we're irrigating pretty regularly, at least a little bit more liberally.
I thought Eric's explanation of basically watering for demand, and varying that with the demand of the crop. If I had ever heard y'all discuss that, I did not remember it, but I thought that was a pretty good suggestion for folks. I never thought about it, varying the amount of water or the frequency to accomplish a varying amount based on that, instead of just doing it on a schedule, which I think is historically the way we would have done it.
I think the two ways, like I mentioned, the two quickest ways to use less water and water more accurately or precisely is on that front end, on back end. But that middle is, it is using. So it is a curve. So the two things that we always try to say, understand growth stage, but know what water use is, when the peak water use, and then if you understand that, and then how much moisture is actually in the profile available to the crop, then you can match that use. And, applying it's a little bit more difficult, especially when the majority of our acres here, especially in the deltas, furrow irrigated. Amount that we can apply is pretty hard to regulate. We pretty much, depending on the soil type, sometimes it's hard, but you're filling up the profile. You're filling it up all the way and doing so that it's that timing that we match the demand. That's right.
Well, and you've got moisture sensors out everywhere. What are those looking like right now? Is everything still pretty charged across the locations you have those?
Yeah, even generalizing, but what we've seen, so we have several programs. We have the on-station research that we're looking at, and we've got agent demonstration sites that we have almost 40 different farms looking at sensors, and we're low. We're still wet. We had good rain last week. I mean, for corn specifically, we're getting close. There's some tasseling, getting close to tasseling, so getting ready. But even then, all of our sensors are still showing adequate moisture. And so we haven't really shown much we're not pushing it yet on any of our soil moisture sensor sites. So I think we had a really good timely rain last week as far as a lot of the corn goes. I started getting a little bit of pressure of phone calls, and that rain, depending on obviously your situation, I thought it was pretty well timed to slow a lot of that concern down.
Brian was talking about East Mississippi, at least along 82, being real dry over there, that it had been quite a while since they had a good, significant rain. And you're talking about Starkville. I don't know how far north and south of 82 he was referring to, but he said that a couple times, that it was dry over there. And, of course, that was before the rain. I have no idea what they would have got from the rain last week. Drew, you mentioned the root system and the depth of the moisture and the depth of the roots. In a year like 2024, how does the fact that we've had really regular rain, sometimes rain too often, the influence on the root structure there because they haven't had to mine natural moisture from depth, how does that intersect with our irrigation scheduling and irrigation practices?
Well, so my first thought is, and I think Larson even said this too, is I think some of the higher yielding years is drier maize. And so you're not hurting it by too much moisture, but you're also encouraging growth and root growth. And so I think that's highly correlated, that we've seen that over the past year. So that's one thing that shows that not irrigating too early is not only not going to hurt it, but in some cases you're going to hurt it with yield by irrigating too early. And you can see there's soil compaction, other things that can look at restricting root growth as well. But as we look at soil moisture sensors and as the growth stages move along, you can see that water use as it's going down. I mean, I always talk about with my children, if I give them a plate full of macaroni and cheese and broccoli and chicken, and if they keep eating the macaroni and cheese and I put them another spoonful of macaroni and cheese, they're going to keep eating the macaroni and cheese. They're not going to go move around the plate trying to eat that broccoli. And so if we keep it wet and plentiful during the shallow, those roots aren't going to go find any other, they're not going to work harder than they need to. And, there's also some just growth or the depths that they're going to go do, but they're not going to go unless they have to, and they're going to be pretty efficient plants. And so establishing that early on and getting the depth there and getting them ready for the high water use and drier times is very helpful. And so, later in the season, and based on your question too, is later in that season, if we have low water use or even you're not seeing water use down at those depths of those lower sensors for whatever reason, maybe the roots didn't make it down there, there's compaction, there's a hard pan, whatever the reason would be, your frequency, talk about the matching demand, but we're going to have to irrigate a lot sooner or more frequent as well because our profile is so much smaller. Whether there's moisture down there or not, if they can't utilize that, we may be talking 6 to 12 inches as opposed to a lot of times we see roots really pulling water down to 30, 36 inches in corn.
So we were talking about corn, but does that apply to soybeans and cotton?
It does. Depths would be a little bit different.
Sure.
Corn is going to go deeper, and the rates that they go down. But yes, our general recommendation, if we're using watermark sensors where we pick the depth, is going to be 6 inches, 12 inches, 24, and you can go down to 36. And so, you have some gaps in there where you are guessing between, if you do 12 to 24 inches. We just watch that moisture. You can see in those sensors where that water use is happening at 12 inches based on growth stage and soybean, cotton, and then as it gets deeper and it starts using 24 inches, then we're pulling that sensor into the equation. Then we can start calculating how much is available based on depths. And so all of our recommendations is, we have 6, 12, and 24, and then we're calculating available water by the total depth of that profile. So we're understanding where those roots are, what's available to those roots. We're using what our sensors are telling us by those depths, and that's how we make those decisions.
And how's that look in comparison to corn right now on those acres where you have research-based sensors?
As far as where water use is?
Yeah, you still got plenty of moisture in the profile, and nobody's really...
Yeah, so we're seeing water use 12, 18 inches about right now, probably. Some started, it looks like around 24, but I would say around that 18 to 20 inches water use. But it changes quickly. Just as you can see the height of the corn as you go and how fast it's growing. I always say don't get behind, but that's one thing with the soil moisture sensors is you can really monitor water use and you can see, match that demand. If we're using the numbers that we're getting from watermarks, it may be using 2 to 3 points a day, and then the peak, it may be using 10 to 12 points a day. And so that's one way that makes it a lot easier to match the demand because what's leaving what's going through that crop on an average by day basis.
Based on the research you've done over the last however many years, what's the best triggering point to initiate irrigation for soybeans?
Well, from a growth stage standpoint, we try to get into that reproductive stage. And so when you look at, R3 to R4, we got that pod development. And then transitioning over to R5 and R6, you got the filling. We want to have the number of pods that we want and the filling of those pods. That's that window that we really try to protect, just like we talked about tasseling, right before tasseling and corn. I like to try to hold off until about R3. And obviously there's last year, I feel like it was a little bit drier earlier on that made it a lot of the decisions a lot harder. But most of the time we have adequate moisture through our spring rain and then what's in the profile to get to that point. And then so R3, and as far, it depends on the trigger from the sensor standpoint. That depends on what sensor you're using. If you're using watermarks, we try to bring it back down to about that 65, 70 kilopascal standpoint to hold it. And that usually is pretty safe to make sure that there's adequate moisture for it.
Are the last 2 years so much on people's minds that they're focused on how they irrigated in 22 and 23 and they're wanting to jump the gun for 24?
Because you're talking about
it was drier in 22 and 23.
It is difficult. I mean, if it's dry earlier, and obviously depending on what kind of soil type you're on, so that cracking clay, that heavy soil, that can dry out really quickly, and so that's a difficult balance to wait on whenever you're trying to irrigate, and you want to make sure that you are irrigating at the right time. But then that when that soil can start, some of those heavy clay soils that can start cracking open, it can escalate pretty quickly, and then that's when we irrigate too long, and then when we have too much water running for too long on that, and so we're extended period of time, 30, 45, or 48 hours, then we get into that window where we're having water saturated in that soil on the soybean for too long, and then we're starting to hurt ourselves that way too.
You can smoke a soybean plant. You can scald it pretty easily if there's too much water standing on it for too long.
Yeah.
It's the same time, especially any of those times where I get called to fields, they irrigated and it rained 3 inches. Mm-hmm. And that's a bad situation, but it's almost always a heavier clay type situation, and it's not the lightest of fields in the state. And then, the one thing I was going to say is you always say don't get behind, but can you ever get ahead?
I think you definitely can be ahead. It just depends on what stage and where you're at, to where if that being ahead is going to hurt you or it's just wasting you money, and that's the concern. In irrigating in soybean, especially in that heavy clay, irrigating and then followed by a rain, or even worse, if you irrigate and about the time you've irrigated full profile, and then sometimes it takes a day to really start to get oxygen back in there, and then you get another rain, and then you have a really prolonged time of just no oxygen, full wet profile, and then that's where we really hurt. And so using sensors or scheduling at the right time when you need it, and looking at the future, the weather forecast. But that's what we try to look at when using sensors is if we feel really comfortable that we're not hurting anything from a moisture standpoint, and we've got we know we've got 6 to 7 days before we really are pushing it, and we have a rainfall chance in day 5, then that's when the conversations really pay for themselves with sensors. Is look, we got plenty of moisture. There's a chance, and on day 5, we're not going to hurt anything until after that. We've got time to start irrigating. Let's see what rainfall we get, and then make a call right after that system goes out. If you're waiting, you either get a free irrigation with a perfect timing, or and what you didn't do is you didn't irrigate, and then 2 days later you got another rainfall on top of it and hurt yourself.
On the small soybeans on heavy clay that you were describing and saying it's getting dry, and it can get dry and then take a longer period of time to get it charged back up. Loaded question. What's worse, running water across to keep from getting to that point where it does take a long time to get that profile charged back up, and you're just spending that 24, 36, 48 hour run to get it charged up? Is it worse to water them too early to keep that from happening, or to have to water them too long to correct it.
Yeah.
And I know, so I said, I see
That
the
is
look
a
on your
loaded
face. That's a loaded question.
So I'm going to answer it with it depends.
Yeah.
Because that's my defense.
That's a good way to wiggle out of that.
That's right.
I think.
Well, so when you say young beans, and so what I would do would go out.
So like vegetative beans.
Yeah. Everything's weather we do is weather related, and it's always different every year. But when it starts to crack open, sometimes that cracks on the surface, and if it's not deep enough, it's not too deep, then it's still not going to take that much extra time. But it's whenever you have those deep, it's dry, deeper, 12 plus inches and wide open cracks, that it's going to really take a lot longer. But if it's cracked open on the surface, but you poke down in there a little bit deeper, and 6 inches down there, you can roll it up and make a nice ball because it's got plenty of moisture. Then I would wait a little bit longer, because even though there's some cracks on the surface, it doesn't take that much time. It doesn't have to go very deep to fill in those cracks and then move along. This is my 6th summer here. Those cracks has been I think the hardest decisions I've had is on a lot of those cracking clays, and then those cracks are so much different. And then kind of the other side of that is, one year we would have just really small rains on this one field that we had, and it would 2/10, 1/10, 2/10 real frequently, and we couldn't get it to crack open. It was nice and sealed at the top, but we were dry down below with the moisture sensor was saying it needed water, but we couldn't get water in there. And so we were wanting the surface to crack open. I mean, it's just a complete inverse of that scenario. And so really I have to go out to each field and poke around and see what those cracks are doing. But that specific question, I would see how deep that crack is. And if it's pretty wet, not too deep down, then it shouldn't take too long to do it, because the time thing can be a hard thing to overcome whenever you have to irrigate twice as long. Easily sometimes. But also
if it's
irrigate
dry,
too early.
The first irrigation is always going to be the longest one.
Yeah, that's right.
Cotton. What's our trigger for cotton?
Man, cotton's the hardest.
Yep. Cotton's an art.
It's an art. That's right. And that's one you really want to look at the forecast afterwards, right? And then growth stages. And that's one where we have a study where we looked at, a wet threshold, what kind of everything we've always done around that 80 centibar threshold, and then a lot drier, which is over 100, 125. And out of all the other trigger research that we've done, cotton is the one where we lost yield on both sides of that spectrum, on the wet trigger and on the dry trigger. And then we had that sweet spot right there in the middle. We talked about we can lose yield, but most of the on-station wet, medium, and dry standpoint, we didn't lose yield, we just lost money. That's probably the most common question I get. I get the question of, why did my dry land out yield my irrigated in cotton more than I do any other crop? I'll put it that way. And so it is an art. The threshold's still about the same as far as the soil moisture sensors and the dryness goes, but it's about the timing and making sure. And so I'm deflecting this one as much as I can too, because it's looking at the weather, it's looking at the clouds. I mean, even after you irrigate, and if it just doesn't have a nice sunny day. The easiest one with cotton is when it's hot, dry, sunny.
Yep.
And the sensors are saying you're getting close, just go. Outside of that, I venture of holding off a lot easier than I do any other. And then the growers around, the farmers around here are that same way. Most of them are a lot more leery of irrigating on cotton than they are when I have conversations with them on soybean and corn. But I mean, it's still the same overall. Looking at roots, looking at weighted moisture in that profile, and looking at the crop growth stage as the same as the others. You're just looking at a lot more environmental factors with cotton to make sure you're not doing more harm than good by irrigating. I mean, any questions anybody has, we can definitely anytime answer your questions. Come out and take a look and help work through some of these decisions.
Thanks, man. It's good to see you as always.
Appreciate it.
And we can pretty much expect a rain now whenever this goes live.
We'll
that's
make
kind
it
of what
work.
happens. At least that's what did last year. We'll
Let's
see what happens this year.
Keep the streak going.
I know you're not a baseball fan, but what would Tom Allen's walkout song be?
I don't know that I have an answer to that.
Time's on your side.
We'd probably go bad to the bone. Thorogood.
Okay.
Can't beat a good Thorogood song.
There's no wrong answer.
Well, what
No,
would yours
there's-
be? Everybody else's?
Yeah. What would yours be?
Oh, I asked the questions. I don't have to answer them.
Tiny Bubbles?
I don't know. I'd have to give it some consideration.
I see. So
We
he
don't
can
get-
put everybody else on the spot.
And-
You don't get a moment to think about it, but
And-
I need some time.
you-
I mean, nobody's going to beat Paralisi.
no, that's a fact.
And he probably came out that quick, too. Didn't
Oh,
he?
no,
He-
no,
he
he-
loaded.
it was
He had, like thought about it.
instantaneous. There
Right.
was
Yeah, no,
no
it-
hesitation.
Yeah. Finally, somebody asked me this question. Boom.
I wasn't exactly. I'm even more impressed because that's not what I typically expect him to listen to.
You're just hitting the questions perfectly for Paralisi. then.
Oh, I've got one for Cook. That's just simmering. All right, we're going to sign off.
The Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.